So in this segment, we're going to be looking at kind of a video done by Jeremy Hunt and corrected by Lewis Goodall. So I'll be throwing my bit in here as well. And God, I wish I could shoot parody videos like this. I think Goodall still needs some work, but I did find it pretty funny and interesting. You know, Jeremy Hunt does miss out some key things when he talks about inflation. So we'll get onto those at the relevant time. So a flat white as a coffee choice, a bit weird. I'm a mocha man myself.
Hi, can I get a flat white, please?
Hi, could I get a can of Tizer, please?
Also, a can of Tizer, great choice. Tizer is a very underrated drink, I think.
While my coffee is being made, let me tell you what we're doing to halve inflation.
Now, while my Tizer is being manufactured, I'd like to talk to you about the overall state of the economy and inflation with the aid of these coffee cups.
Coffee is getting more expensive. A year ago, it would have been around £2.50, but now...
So 256. I know Phil had a lot of issues with this video as well because the rounding's really bad. If it's 256, you would round up the number to 260.
Now it's gone up to nearly £3
That's a lot off £3. You could argue 290, but sure.
a cup.
We found out today that inflation in the UK has fallen, albeit by a tiny amount, from 10.7% to 10.5%, a fall of 0.2 percentage points, still by historic standards, extremely high.
So what's the plan to halve inflation?
You know, and the thing is, without them doing a lot, inflation will go down because inflation is just the rate of price increases generally. So if prices stay, you know, the same where they are now, it means inflation hasn't gone up, if that makes sense. At least that's the way I kind of understand it.
Now, the government says that it wants to halve inflation by the end of the year, which sounds ambitious. The Chancellor talked about it today, but it's really not as ambitious as it sounds. Why? Well, virtually every independent forecaster basically thinks that irrespective of government action, irrespective of what they do, that is just going to happen anyway. Why? Well, if you think about it, if, say, this cup of coffee went up in price from £3 to £3.30 in the course of a year, then that would represent an inflation rate for this coffee of 10%. But if in the year after, the price of the coffee only went up by 20 pence, so from £3.30 to £3.50 this time, then that would represent an inflation rate of 6%. In other words, inflation for this coffee would fall because the price has not gone up as quickly as it did before.
So yeah, that's the way inflation numbers are calculated is really weird. But for the government to argue that they're going to do anything about this is just ludicrous. They've made things so much worse than it had to be.
Basically, as long as prices across the economy don't increase at the same rate as they did before, then inflation across the economy will come down without the government doing anything.
We are investing a lot of money in renewable and nuclear power, so that our energy prices aren't at the whim of the international gas markets.
And that is forecast to happen across the economy, especially in energy where international gas prices have already decreased considerably.
But the problem is, you know, the energy companies said don't expect our gas prices to fall anytime soon. They're going to stay high, even though the wholesale price of gas has gone down. So that doesn't even make any sense. The way, you know, the costs are calculated, I know it's the futures market and blah, 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 but I think it's a load of nonsense, I'll be honest. I think it's just there to confuse people.
There are lots of reasons why inflation has risen. One of them is COVID. Another is Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
Now, the government and Chancellor are right. There are lots of factors beyond their control which are contributing to inflation and have made it worse, whether it's COVID or the war in Ukraine. But Brexit, something the government doesn't want to talk about, is also contributing to inflation. It's made supply chains more costly and less efficient. It's made accessing labour, more difficult, again contributing to inflation. And indeed, it's probably led to something of a decline, an ongoing structural decline in sterling, making goods more expensive. And if you take cost of living more...
So let's look at each one, right? Because each one is right. He talked about, you know, staffing's become more difficult, supply chains, you know, the cost of importing has gone up a lot, the cost of exporting has gone up a lot as well, and those are some of the key problems. When you look at food inflation around the 15% mark, I think it was the Bank of England's kind of experts who said that the UK is facing significantly higher amounts of food inflation because of Brexit. When you look at staffing, the UK is struggling to get in the staff we need, so it means it makes growth much more difficult because, again, you know, once again, you need immigration to grow the economy. So there are lots of problems within the UK.
More generally, and housing costs, well, who could forget the role that the trust experiment played in that, at least temporarily destabilizing mortgage markets with costs and effects for people renewing their mortgages every single month.
And, I think it's more than just, temporary destabilization. She caused interest rates to go up fairly significantly from where they were. And even now, the banks have taken away a lot of not the mortgage offers, because I think they're legally binding, but the bits before that, the deals in principle, that they've been taken away from a lot of people, and people have been offered 6 and 7% mortgages compared to 2 and 3% mortgages that were offered in years gone by. Also, the fact that because of the interest rate rises, people have lost a lot of disposable income because their mortgage rates keep going up. And what that means is they don't have money to spend elsewhere in the economy. Liz Truss also costs us $30 billion directly. The cost of borrowing for the government has gone up significantly because of Liz Truss as well, because now there's a fear around UK bonds. Are they going to be stable? It's caused so many problems, the Liz Truss thing. I think he's kind of downplayed it a bit, but I'm glad that he's mentioned it. I'm glad he's mentioned Brexit. These are good things. I give Lewis Goodall a rough time on the channel because I know he could do better. I've seen him do pretty good stuff on the BBC and with the news agents where he's now, LBC, blah blah blah. But I expect good things of him. That's probably why I'm so mean to him all the time.
And these are some of the reasons why it is that Britain is forecast to have another year of dismal growth, some of the lowest growth rates in the developed world.
Lowest in the G7, lowest out of the OECD top 20, aside from Russia. So yeah, we're in good company there with the Russians.
Why it is that Britain, unusually among developed countries, still has a smaller economy today than it had before the pandemic. Now,
and that's, we've bucked the trend of so many other countries in the G7 and in the G20. That's how bad the things are looking for us right now. That's how bad Brexit has been. That's how bad the Tories have been for this country. That our economy is still smaller than it was pre-pandemic, whilst other countries are not in the same boat as us. Which other countries, right, wasted £32 billion on test and trace? Oh, wait, which other countries gave millions and millions of pounds, right, to their friends and some jeweler guy from America who has no experience in PPE, right? Our government are so incompetent, right? We had PPE in this country, and what did they do? They bought it from randos in the House of Lords and in other places, and EU member states brought up the PPE we had in this country because these warehouses, these companies wanted to sell it off, and the only offers they got were from the EU member states. That's how ridiculous this country is.
Now, the government is right. There are lots of reasons in the short term that contribute to that. But also we have a long-term productivity crisis, and the government has been in office a long time, 12, 13 years. And they also have to provide an account for why that crisis continues to exist, even after all of those years when they've been in power.
And I think it's a good point. I think if he worked for the BBC, that's maybe a point he wouldn't be able to make. But the fact is, the government have to account for why we have struggled so much. Even under David Cameron, whilst we were members of the EU, growth was incredibly slow. We had a double-dip recession. It sucked because they don't know how to grow an economy. These guys couldn't grow a plant if you gave them all the instructions they needed and Poison Ivy, the DC character, on top of that. But this is what I found weird from Jeremy Hunt, because Jeremy Hunt, he's quoting an article about, UK wages grow at the fastest rate for more than 20 years, but still failing to keep up with inflation, right? And then Hunt says the best way to keep people's wages going further is to stick to our plan to halve inflation, blah, blah, blah. We must not do anything that risks permanently embedding high prices into our economy. And for me, it kind of looks like he's hinting at not wanting to increase wages because that would somehow, damage our recovery. I don't know, maybe I've read that wrong, but Jeremy Hunt, he feels like a more kind of right, centre-right, more boring version of Starmer in a lot of ways. But yeah, Lewis Goodall, great video from him. Like I said, he gets a rough time on the channel, but yeah, it's this video was very, very well done. I appreciate the parody aspect of it, going to a coffee shop or having some sort of coffee setting and just absolutely just kind of ripping Jeremy Hunt of it. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.